Welcome to 52 Miniatures. My name is Alex and this video is sponsored by Corvus Belli. In today's video, we're taking a look at tabletop wargame Infinity, an introductory video on the world of Infinity. I painted up two factions, I've tried to play a game, and I've tried to make a video that answers the question, what is Infinity? And so if you're curious or interested in the miniatures, the game itself, or the setting, I hope this video might give you some answers. Another epic tale from the hobby realm. I've been looking around for new games recently, and so when Corvus Belli reached out asking if I'd like to check out and paint some of their models, I answered, I know nothing of Infinity. I'd love to paint some of the models, but wouldn't it be great if I also checked out the entire setting, painted two teams and played a game? So that I can give people a first glimpse of what the entire ecosystem looks like. No one tried to stop me. Not even me. And so here we are. Infinity is a 28mm scale miniature sci-fi war game that's been around since about 2005 and has established a rather vast setting, story and miniature range. Without any research, it's just how I do things. I jumped right in and got two action boxes, like start collecting faction boxes. The JSA, because sci-fi samurai are cool, and the Bakunin Observance action pack. The Observance of Saint Mary of the Knife, a nomadic faction, because sci-fi nuns with guns are also cool. The Infinity universe is set in an alternative world much like ours, some 180 or so years into the future. Many cultures that we know and recognize reformed in an alternative setting that in a way takes the edge off of possible recognizable realism and the delicate issues that they might bring. And instead chucks us into a future of super awesome military spec ops playfulness. Humanity is taken to the stars, wars have been fought, no one really likes anyone else much, the aliens are out to get everyone, artificial intelligence, cybernetic implants, hackers, religious fanatics, pirates, explorers, all the fun. You can play ninjas, wolf soldiers, geishas, folk in kilts, aliens, Templar-style space knights, robots and everything in between, and in a, to me, very cyberpunk setting. With some classic sci-fi vibes thrown in, like a stew of Ghost in a Shell, Neuromancer and Akira, seasoned with a bit of The Expanse and Dune. The miniatures are exquisite in detail, predominantly metal miniatures. Some of the larger miniatures come in plastic, and they're all true scale. Something I adore, and it definitely sets Infinity apart. True scale means the miniatures are sculpted to look realistic. The opposite, if you will, is heroic scale, where heads, hands, and often weaponry is sculpted larger, often seen in sci-fi and fantasy miniatures. The 28mm true scale kinda makes me feel like I'm playing a historical game, and it lends a seriousness and credibility to the sci-fi setting. Regular-sized infantry miniatures seem mainly to consist of 2 to 4 parts. Some larger minis, like the plastic pentanent miniature from the Bakunin faction, there's a few more. Dealing with metal miniatures can for some feel a little intimidating, but in the grand scheme of things, in regards to cleanup and assembly, the differences to plastics is not huge. As with plastics, we have mold lines and such that need a bit of scraping. Using a snap blade knife actually works pretty well, but I can really recommend getting a set of these needle files or jewelry files for filing. A little tip when assembling. After testing that the pieces fit, I've personally found the best workflow is to start attaching and gluing the main part of the mini, often torso and legs, to the base first. Letting that set and then gluing on the rest of the bits, like arms and guns. Playing a game of Infinity requires about 10 miniatures, all relative to the point size of the game versus the point cost of each troop. You could play less or more, but the number 10 gives you a general idea. And so I've got 19 miniatures to paint. In a short period of time. I mean, if I'm going to be making a video talking about a game, I kinda want to have some personal gameplay experience. And we can't be playing games with unpainted models now, can we? Well, you can. It's absolutely fine. I'd kind of endorse it, actually. I just saw this as a chance to practice some efficient painting. You know, I've always admired the infinity box art, but man, is it above my level of painting. And so for me to display them or get some minis on the table, paint style is kind of fun too. Besides, if I paint 19 minis, you'll get a better look at the style and the range. And I do want to do an alternative style, something different from the box art. I remembered my infatuation with the artist Enki Bilal and the Nikopol trilogy. It's all very weird stuff with stunning imagery. Utterly dystopian sci-fi, muted background colors with splashes of stronger colors here and there, all very moody. This would be my infinity universe. A little less manga and a little more French ashtray grey. But how to get these wonderful minis painted in just a few days? I'm not known for my speedy painting chops. I'm more of a turtle than a ninja. Well, there's going to have to be a little elitism going on. Rather, some airbrush work. I often try to avoid the airbrush for videos. I know a lot of you don't have one, but right now I'd be silly not to use it. But don't worry, I'll give you some tips on how to do something similar without the airbrush. I've divided this paint job into 3 parts. Simply playable, can't stop painting, and finally, you did what now? But let's move on. Something I always do with metal minis before priming is giving them a quick wipe with isopropyl alcohol, avoiding the glue joints, mind you. But I have been handling these quite a fair bit, and I want them to be nice and clean to give the primer the best chance to stick. I built a very inefficient little spray booth, better than nothing. A wet cloth stuck to the back of a cardboard box did actually reduce a little spray dust. And then primed black. After that had cured, I gave the miniatures a zenithal prime. This is spraying the miniature from up top and at a 30-degree angle down all around the miniature. This creates a grey gradient that emulates the light shining from an imaginary sky above the miniature. The miniatures instantly come alive. After that, I gently dry brushed the miniatures with white, this by using a large, slightly damp brush with very little paint on it, lightly brushing the miniature from top moving down. This picks out the raised edges a little. If you don't have an airbrush, you could do this step to the more extreme, replacing the zenithal prime, starting from a black primed miniature, gently working up a grey zenithal with the help of a large dry brush or makeup brush. Over this, I'm airbrushing on with some speed paints from Army Painter. This could be any transparent style, contrast paint, or inks. What I'm doing is tinting the black and white base with some color, but still retaining some of that depth and character because of the paint's transparent nature. I've used Army Painter as they're available to most out there, and because if you don't have an airbrush, you can just brush them on. Make sure to dilute rather heavily though, regardless of airbrush or brush. I used the speed paint medium. I'm not after the contrast style paint effect, just the color tint. Rather repeat thin layers than doing something too heavy. My warrior nuns are getting a classic white and red theme, but also a lot of khaki. I mean, khaki is very warrior-like, but also a little more in line with my inspirational source. The JSA are getting an old-school sci-fi vibe with orange and teal. Using an airbrush to apply colors like this is fun, yet a little fiddly, but I think getting over the fact that each single little detail on a miniature has to be its own color is how to get things done swifter. At first things appear a little messy to you, but then call it painterly and you'll soon get over it. After the 2 broad strokes of color on the 2 different schemes, I go in with speed paint on a brush for the most basic detail work. A dark gray on all weapons. Some brown on leather, some different style skin tones. A slightly orange skin vibe that I've seen a lot in the Bilal inspiration on the nuns, and a darker complexion on the samurai. And some colourful hair. If we're going to analyze my inspiration, I see a lot of very muted teal, orange, khaki and grey atmospheres with distinct primary color splashes like blue hair or red blood. For those of you who follow me, you might be wondering where I've been doing the painting. It doesn't look like the bunker, and no, this is my new frontier outpost. Hopefully you'll see some more videos from here every now and again. But it was, however, time to go back to the bunker, and so for transportation and storage purposes, I magnetized the bases on the models. If you're not already doing this, just start. It's a great way to transport your miniatures. I've reached a point where I could be playing a game with these minis. They're not perfect, but they are two distinctly different color schemes. At arm's length, they actually look pretty cool, simply playable. Unfortunately, I can't stop here. I realize I'm maybe not so much of a turtle, I just don't know when to let go. So maybe badger it is then. The next step is adding a bit more love to the most important bits. Layering on some highlights and colors. The outcome of this step is largely based on your own painting skill and should probably be adapted thereafter. Personally, I'm trying to enhance what I know I can enhance and leave alone everything I'll probably just mess up. I also pretty much don't paint anything under waist level, concentrating most of the effort on the stuff that is actually visible on the gaming table. But I stumbled onto a bit of a gem here, highlighting with a speed paint. This battleship grey contains a lot of white. Kind of annoying for a lot of traditional contrast style work, but it does layer on real smoothly when used as a regular paint. I used it to highlight all the weaponry. I kind of loved how this worked out. Easy to paint on and again gave a very sort of painterly result. While I work on some of the details labelled important, I'd like to talk a little about the miniatures. I think at first I found them rather intimidating because of the relatively petite scale and the very high detail level. But strangely enough, I've ended up having the opposite experience. This is the first time I'm actually pleased with such a swift painting effort. I don't know if it's the crisp detail that lends itself to my workflow or that many of the details are so very sci-fi that they work real well in simple schemes. And the size of the minis just meant I worked faster. Anyway, I just wanted to pass on that these minis paint up well even when not aiming for awesome box art level. I did, however, want to give this geisha-style mini a bit of extra love. I think because there's a cat. I mean, this is awesome stuff. Anyway, another speed painting trick. I used that same battleship grey again on all the flowers on the kimono. The speed paint flows into the engraved details on the dress, giving me a neutral base to paint on some other color. For me, a pink. I can then half-heartedly highlight the petals with a light pink for the flowery dress, and everything takes on a much more fab appearance. There's still the you did what now paint stage to get through, but first let's play a game of Infinity. I invited my friend Carl over to read the rules while I pretended to be busy moving around awesome Brutal Cities MDF terrain. No, seriously, Carl is great and he's an avid gamer. Together we represent experienced gaming as well as rather hopeless beginners. That would be me. We don't know the game at all, and so what sticks, what piques our interest is probably what is interesting to hear about if you are looking into getting into Infinity. But let's start with a bold statement. Tabletop wargaming is complicated. Anyone who says, this is a simple and fun game, about any wargame is 50% lying to you. Uno is a simple game. Monopoly is simple but with consequences. Dungeon crawlers can be suitably fun after a few spouts of anger decoding the rules. Wargames are complicated and this is why we love them. The complexity means we have a comfortably barricaded niche that attracts only the dedicated. Within this niche, there can be more or less complications, and unless one is an avid weekly gaming night, spots synergies right off the bat, and oh, I write my own wargame rules kind of a gamer, any new wargame ecosystem will feel rather tough to get into because decoding how things are explained is a thing in itself. Every company does it differently. Lastly, games can appear vastly complicated from afar, but when played, you realize it's well thought out basics with onion layers of mechanics added on top that creates a complex environment, and so many rules can mean a complex game that isn't actually more complicated to play than the game with the shorter rules system. Anyway, I'm saying all of this because I think way too many people talking about wargames forget to mention that they require quite a bit of work to get into, and Infinity is no exception. We have a 170-page rulebook, or the roughly 100 pages of the Code 1 rulebook, a slightly scaled-down version of the game. But when given some initial effort, the 170 pages become more of a helpful lexicon and not so much an unassailable mountain, because complexity doesn't always have to mean complicated. Me and Carl used the regular full-size rulebook, but scaled our first game down to the utter basic mechanics. We used probably only about 5% of the rulebook, yet what feels like the backbone of the game that the rest is built upon. Here are some things that stand out from our game, things that makes me want to play the game again. And please remember, this is all utterly simplified. You interact with each miniature individually, like a skirmish-style game, yet a full regular-sized game plays out on a 4x4 board. There are options to create squads of sorts, fire teams, but we are far away from rank and flank wargaming. Each trooper on the table represent one activation point. These activations, called orders, can be chosen to be used on just a few troops. An order, for example, is to move and shoot. If you start with, say, 6 troopers, that gives you 6 orders. But you can choose to use these 6 orders on just a couple of troops. And so one miniature can be moved or activated a multitude of times during your turn if you have enough orders to spend. And some might not be activated at all. The game seems to thrive from massive amounts of terrain and obstacles, creating multi-leveled gameplay in alleyways and along rooftops rather than just moving minis around on a flat field. I'd even say that the game is more about learning how to negotiate cover in the landscape and terrain around you rather than charging dead-on into the fray. The game utilizes something called ARO, Automatic Reaction Order. This means that your opponent can react to your action during your turn. For example, if you run out from cover and you're in the line of sight of an enemy model, that model will try and shoot you during your own turn. I killed most of Carl's troops during his turns and not during my own. This is a great system that means both players are pretty much playing the game simultaneously. Infinity plays with a d20 dice. I know very little about dice theory, but I experienced the joy of rolling dice more and less of the speculative statistics of using d6s. Troops have very few wounds, and so things die fast. Trying to stay out of unnecessary fighting felt more important than the all-out charge, building up a potential for more diverse and creative gameplay. Yet me and Carl did get into a bit of fun shenanigans to see who would stab who in close combat. So charging into the thick of it can be done if you and your opponent want to. I won the game, but we did feel like we kind of missed all the things we stripped away. I don't think we could have started learning this game in any other way, but to keep away from just I shoot you, you shoot me type games, more rules and scenarios will have to be brought in for the coming games. Now to the You Did What paint section, the last addition to my miniatures. Oil paints. Let me show you this little trick. I've got a full video on painting with oils linked above, but here is a swift example. I've mixed a khaki highlight color, oil paints mixed with some white spirit. I paint that oil paint onto this little chest piece, just a rough application. I then take a dry brush and smudge that paint out to a sort of gradient. And in a matter of, well, I don't know, less than a minute, I have this smooth, very painterly highlight. Here is a before and an after. Again, a before and an after. Done in preciously little time. I did this on the khaki and then using different mixes of paint on the red cloth, on the orange and on the teal of the JSA. Finally, I mixed 2 washes, oil paint and white spirit mixed together to create a wash. An indigo, that's a very dark blue, and a sort of dark magenta wash. I used the dark magenta on the teal of the JSA as well as on the skin tones, and the indigo on everything else, khaki and orange. Adding the wash lightly, letting it flow out on its own accord into the crevices, the perfect icing on the cake. For the bases and occasionally miniature feet, I just drowned them quickly in greyish pigment powders, concentrating to some black pigment right under the miniature to simulate shadows. And while you watch me do all of the above, I'll try and tell you about what I've learned about Infinity as a whole. Things that should blip your radar if you're looking at getting into the game. The rules are free. The full 170 pages are free to download from the Infinity website. There is a free list builder, both online and as an app, Infinity Army. There is an extensive Infinity wiki, a great source to find specific rules fast, and it's also linked to the list builder. So for example, if a troop has a type of weapon or skill you are unfamiliar with, you just press it and an Infinity wiki page opens up on that specific topic. These first three things is massive. There are games out there with free rules, but not many provide this much of a well-curated game ecosystem for free. Moving on, picking the faction you think is cool, like I did, is a great place to get going because of the burst of excitement. But the sensible investor would spend a few hours on the Infinity website browsing through the factions and models. Different factions do different things, and finding something important that plays the way you like can be as an important thing as looks. Also, if you're starting out with Code 1, the simpler rule set, I think something I'd recommend, make sure the minis you're looking at are supported. The free list builder can be set to either full Infinity rules or Code 1 rules, and when changing to Code 1 rules, certain units will not be available. It's also worth browsing the Corvus Belli website for deals on starter boxes and such. Oh, and regarding the list builder, it can be set to either centimeters or inches, and movement stats change thereafter. It's all in the details, my friends, and the fact that now most of the world can use their standard measuring devices and not have to order special inch-based things just to play minigames is pretty spectacular. You will definitely want to play with terrain. It doesn't have to be an expensive investment. Household objects can still be terrain, but you'll want to bring terrain into consideration. And regarding that terrain, Infinity plays out in vastly different locations on numerous planets and space stations. The first impressions look is always cyberpunk cities, at least it's been for me. But you could as well be playing in jungles or ancient ruins, so don't be lured into thinking that everything has to be sci-fi cities. If you'd rather prefer other settings, or if you've already got other types of terrain at hand, just use that. Try to play games as fast as you can get into it, even with the most scaled down rules. It'll give you a lot of keys that you can use and actually start watching battle reports and understand what they're about and reading unit stats and they make sense and so on. And if you don't get to meet gaming friends often, check out Tabletop Simulator and see if you can't grow your knowledge on the game there. Corvus Belli also releases a lot of content online. For example, I found a playlist on their YouTube dedicated to my nuns with guns. Videos with model stats, unboxing videos, a dedicated lore video, as well as a playthrough featuring models. Lastly, Infinity has been around for a good while. It's a solid game with a very healthy tournament scene, a huge world of lore and miniatures to go with it. So as investing into a new game goes, this all feels very solid. And that's about all I can think about right now. Please ask me in the comments if you have any questions. However, I'm kind of stoked. As I've said, I feel a little overwhelmed by acclimatizing to the new rule set. I always do. But I liked the first playthrough. I'm glad I convinced myself to paint the faction starters. I varnished everything and it's all playable, but I can also go back and paint in more details if I wish. I hope you like the look of them. The two-tone is very simple, but I like the vibe. Thank you Enki Bilal for the inspiration, and thank you to Corvus Belli for sponsoring this video. It's been a blast. I hope this video has been fun to watch as well and informative for those looking into Infinity. Thank you to my dear patrons, as always, and thank you for watching. Please, if you haven't already, like and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.